My wife, 42 female, and I, 48 male, were married for 14 years. We never had any children, but that's not to say we didn't try. She was a manager at Kmart, and I worked in a shipping warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like we belonged with each other and our work crew. We had a routine and friends like family that I wouldn't have traded for the world. We were always honest, talkative, attentive, and considerate of each other. Our sense of humor was pretty dark. We liked watching and reading things online that would make other people squeamish. We also thought it was super funny when we ripped on each other and our friends thought we were seriously fighting. People from our apartment building would take turns cooking on the grill for the rest of us for a giant cookout. One day, the grill was moved to a different spot and caught a tree on fire. It spread to the roof of the building and down, all in a matter of minutes. Thankfully, everyone survived, but my wife and I passed out and had to be rescued by a volunteer firefighter before the fire trucks even arrived. We were taken to the hospital for asphyxiation from smoke inhalation. I was discharged 2 weeks before my wife, because she wasn't able to cover her mouth and nose like I did while I searched for her. It's impossible to see in smoke like that, so I started choking before I found her. While my wife recovered, she was conscious, but she needed special attention and respiratory treatment. I noticed one doctor that seemed to care very deeply about my wife. He was handsome and charming, which irritated me. My wife smiled at him, and they looked into each other's eyes very intently when they, mostly him, spoke. When I started staying by my wife's side, the doctor told me he was the one to receive her that day in the ER, and he'd been looking after her ever since. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted my wife to get the care she needed, but I didn't like this guy. He seemed to think too highly of himself and think he could take my wife if he wanted to. When he helped her stand up, he put his arm around her waist and held her close. She took her time moving when he was like that. I was struggling with my thoughts at this point. She didn't really need help walking, did she? My wife could barely speak, but she seemed smitten with the doctor and emotionally strained when she looked at me. She never said anything really alarming, but it was clear something had changed. We had a near-death experience, and that does change people, but I didn't want to believe my wife, and I wouldn't make it through this together, unchanged. When it was time for her to be discharged, she hesitated to go home. She asked if she could stay in the hospital longer, which gave the doctor the opportunity to offer her follow-up visits at our home. I was very suspicious and didn't think it was all in my head anymore. I thought about objecting, but decided not to. I imagined how bad and weird it would look for me to deny my wife doctor visits. Even if he was pushing boundaries, I'd look like the bad guy. I couldn't believe he so easily agreed to make house visits. This was something a person with much less qualifications could have done, so I was positive it was because he at least wanted to visit my wife, if not more. The very first doctor visit was at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Of course, I was at work. I texted my wife at 9:10 to ask if he was there and how it was going. She didn't reply, so I started to wonder what was going on. I felt like a shell of a person walking around the warehouse. 2 hours later, I still heard nothing from her. Coworkers approached me, concerned for my well-being because I was pale and clammy. At 11:25, I was pulling into her driveway. I drove recklessly to get there as fast as I could after I got permission from my boss. I noticed his luxury vehicle and that the front door was locked, which was unusual for when we had a visitor. As I walked up the stairs, I heard them. Our dresser was pinning the bedroom door open against the wall because privacy was never a concern of ours. When I got there, I just dropped to my knees. I had no control over my body. The doctor leaped up and scrambled to get his pants on, flushed and angry. My wife covered herself with blankets, yelling helplessly as I rose to my feet and started throwing punches. It was the loudest I heard her since before the fire, and it made my blood run cold. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. Something made her change and let this man screw up her emotions. After I got in a few punches in my adrenalized state, the doctor must have realized what a dire and unprofessional situation he was in, because he stumbled down the stairs, got to his car, and drove off. In the bedroom, my wife apologized profusely and pleaded for me to forgive her, but I just screamed no and called her names that accurately described what she did. Of course, when I said cheater, she tried to say I stopped them, so it didn't count. She failed to understand that trying to seduce him with her eyes and gestures in the hospital and making out with him in the nude still counted as cheating. At first I was worried he was going to press charges against me, and it would be my word against his, but nothing happened for months. I tried to get the doctor fired, but it didn't work because nothing was captured on camera, and he hadn't told anyone he was making a house call. Plus, he had expensive lawyers that would have pinned all the blame on me for causing him injuries. My wife left pitiful voicemails on my phone, but when she realized I couldn't stand to look at her, she continued seeing the doctor, even before our divorce was final. I ended up kicking her out of the house, and a week later she posted that she was in a relationship with him. It made me sick. Life really seemed cruel, unfair, and without reason at this point. Thankfully, that's when it all started to turn around. She moved in with the doctor, who wasn't going to hand her money to help with the divorce aftermath. It didn't take long before AP realized what a mess she was and dumped her, kicking her to the curb when she had nothing else. She was so defeated, she didn't even try to get me to let her back in. Her sister let her move in, since she was exceptionally depressed after screwing up her whole life with me. My ex calls me occasionally, saying she misses me and would give anything in the world to have another chance at being my wife. She sort of blames the fire at our apartment for screwing up her head and making her think she felt things for the doctor when it was just survivor thankfulness. I didn't believe a word she said. For all I knew, she wouldn't be saying any of that to me if it weren't for AP leaving her. OP, I am so sorry your wife cheated on you with her doctor. It most likely was because her emotions of recovery influenced her to do something she hadn't done before. Emotions are not as big and powerful as what people think. With maturity, practice, and self-control, anyone can manage their emotions and do what's right. If denying the temptation bothers them that much, they should wait 72 hours after rejoining their spouse before deciding to talk to them about it. This conversation could end the relationship, since there's temptation, but at least there's a chance some sense could be talked into the tempted one and the two of you could grow stronger. You did the right thing by separating from her after stopping them. That's the only way to get a clear head and realize you're going to be okay without that person in your life. It takes strength and courage to part from people that have hurt us, but it is better to stand on your own for a while than with a traitor. Thanks for sharing with us. Now let's move on to our next story for the day. At the time of this story, my wife was 26 and I was 25. We were getting along fine, married for 3 years, together for 6. Ironically, one of the things that attracted me to her the most was her maturity. She usually thought through any big life decisions very carefully, like what college she went to, haircuts she tried, and most importantly, when she wanted to have kids. Her parents raised her to think things through, but they were never very good with money. Her grandmother was the one to put her through college. So in her 3rd year of marriage, we had debt for my schooling and some of hers, and she still hadn't landed a job in her field. What she was working wasn't paying well at all, so a lot of the strain was on me. I could tell she felt bad, but I didn't know she was about to make a big decision without talking to me first. She decided to sell her car and met a potential buyer on a Monday while I was at work. He was very excited about it, but he couldn't drive it home until the weekend. So to reserve it, he paid her in full. Cash. She gave him a bill of sale, dated, signed, and notarized. However, she continued driving the car, and I didn't realize she'd sold it. She mentioned over dinner that she really loved her car, and then she broke down into tears. That's when she explained it all to me, and added that she'd spent half of his cash on our bills and debt payments. I was pretty upset with her, and I told her she'd probably have to sell her car to him, since we couldn't pay him back his money. Her face was deflated, but accepted facts. She screwed up by selling a car she loved and needed, but she had to follow through now. I was at work on Saturday when my wife said the buyer was coming to get the car. She didn't respond to me while he was there, so that made me worry. I checked the live feed of our security camera out front. I only saw a guy, crew cut, standing in the driveway with the cars, but I rewound it a little and saw that the buyer had arrived with a crew cut to help drive the cars home. When my wife talked to him, it seemed like she was giving him bad news. He waved his arms around and rubbed his head like she was stressing him out. Just when it looked like he was threatening to sue her, she got him to quiet down and lean close to her so she could whisper something. She didn't know the camera didn't record audio. Instantly, his face softened and he smiled. He looked so surprised and happy with whatever she said. He glanced at the camera as my wife took him by the hand and led him around to the back of the house, where we didn't have cameras. Crew Cut just waited awkwardly in the driveway for several minutes. I was already driving home, furious. By the time I got there, the men and their car were gone. My wife's car was still there. She greeted me warmly, as if everything was fine, until she saw the anger in my eyes. I shoved past her to the backyard, where I searched our patio furniture for any signs of foul play. Stuff looked moved around, but I couldn't find anything. I looked across the yard and noticed that our neighbor had a backyard camera that covered our yard too. I knocked on their door, and after hearing my story, they invited me in and recovered the footage for me. They watched the video with me the first time of my wife having sex with the guy on the patio, just like I pictured. I sped walk towards my wife, standing helplessly worried in the backyard. She knew what I was doing and that our marriage could be over. As soon as I started playing her the video, she dropped to her knees. She didn't want to see it and tried saying she was sorry over and over again, as if that would make it all go away. I told her I hated her for what she did to me. I started my life with her, accepting her past and life as my responsibility, and I managed to keep her safe and happy, only for her to end it all by sleeping with someone to pay off a debt. It was low and desperate, and she didn't need to do it. I told her to own up to her decision and follow through with selling the car. She went behind my back and lied more than once. My heart was broken. She told me she didn't see any other way out of it because she felt like she needed her car and his money. Then she kind of bragged by saying she offered him half his money back, but he said her skills paid him back in full. I packed my stuff while she cried and talked about how our bills were paid, so I should be happy and forget anything happened. I went to stay with my coworker. It was awkward, and it made me feel lost. I had to find my packed toothbrush and toothpaste, and while digging through my bag of belongings, I found a pair of my wife's undies. It made me grieve for my loss. She fought me tooth and nail in court, even trying to claim that I was abusive and she was desperate to fall in love again. It was nothing like what you'd expect a woman to say to a judge. Since she couldn't prove anything and I had her cheating on film, she was ordered to leave the house. I sold it and started my life over in a different state, where I was offered twice my previous salary for doing the same amount of work. I know I lucked out and most infidelity victims aren't so lucky, but I wanted people to know that even when I felt that heart pang at my wife's clothing mixed with mine, I didn't run back to her. I deserved a chance at genuine love with someone else, and I actually found it in my new home state of Connecticut. OP, what your wife did was extremely low, and it shows that she didn't think very highly of herself or the vows she took to remain loyal to you. It's hard to imagine why she didn't talk to you about selling her car in the first place, or at least think it through. You did the right thing by checking the camera and going home to figure out what was happening. And as hard as it was to leave her there, feeling so remorseful, it was the right thing for you. After a spouse has committed adultery, it's a good idea to take some days away from them, without contact. They've already cheated, so keeping an eye on them is only going to stress you out and make you more desperate to save the relationship, instead of realizing you're okay without someone who's willing to do this to you. She made a very, very poor decision that the relationship couldn't recover from, all because she didn't talk to her spouse first about what she was thinking. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.